for a second. Let's try and rationalize this for a second.
So, Representative Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the House, recently was cheered on by his Democratic colleagues as the vote for the House leader was in flux due to some defecting Republicans. The vote itself, it happened multiple times. Eventually, Hakeem Jeffries was not nominated, of course, because the Republicans do have a majority in the House. So, just thinking about where we might be if he was the leader of the House, and to go even further, to think about his relationship to Israel, to Zionists, and particularly to Palestine. So in a statement by Representative Jeffries in connection with the Amnesty International report on Israel, Hakeem Jeffries made the statement that Israel is a democracy. It's not an apartheid state. Let's pause right there. Let's pause right there. I think I have a problem with that. The idea that, and I'm not going to go beyond what I should say here, and more particularly, I'll do some reading by UN.org. And let's just highlight this term apartheid here as well. So, calling on the international community to accept and adopt the recent findings in his report, an independent human rights expert said on Friday that apartheid is being practiced by Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory. This is 25 March 2022. Human Rights Organization, as part of the UN. UN Special Rapporteur's report echoes recent findings by Palestinian, Israeli, and international human rights organizations who analyzed Israel's 55-year occupation of the Palestinian territory, right? So I'm sure we'll come back to this, but this idea that Israel is not an apartheid state, right, is just not backed by the UN. So any conclusion to the contrary is demonstrably false, he says, dangerous and designated to isolate Israel in one of the toughest neighborhoods in the world. The special relationship between the U.S. and Israel is anchored in our shared democratic values and geopolitical interests. Before going on, this idea, this toughest neighborhoods in the world. Sure, our last story was about the neighborhood, the West Asian area that includes Israel, and from here on, I may be referring to Israel as apartheid Palestine or mandatory Palestine. I think that might be a little bit more accurate. The special relationship between the U.S. and Israel is anchored in our shared democratic values and geopolitical interests, and that's probably the most honest thing, especially the geopolitical interest portion, right? Democratic values, it might be an overstatement. Depends on what you consider democratic values. I strongly support the special relationship and look forward to redoubling efforts in the region to bring about a lasting two-state solution. And, maybe we'll unpack that as well, this idea of the two-state solution and who supports a two-state solution. In watching numerous Israel news outlets, as well as people who are on the ground in Israel that are in support of Israel, mandatory Palestine, I have seen that they are not in support of the two-state solution. that they are support. They've done away with the idea of the two-state solution. And so this is the only people that speak about the two-state solution are U.S. politicians. So there is Hakeem Jeffries' ideas about Israel, about Zionism. And the question is, like, what impact does that have on him as a person? How does that sit with him, honestly? And not only him, but his family, his relatives. What would let's say his grandfather say about this? What would his immediate family say about this idea that not only is he a staunch supporter of Israel as a leader of the Democratic House, but he also has received tremendous amounts of money from them. Let's take a look at Hakeem Jeffries and his federal congressional candidacy and where the money came from that he used to run his campaign. Well, look at the top contributor there. Pro-Israel America PAC. Pro-Israel America PAC is the top contributor. So, just thinking about that, in the context of support for Israel, and then, of course, the idea of a PAC, right? This is dark money. This is legalized dark money. We can talk further about that in other episodes as well, this concept of a PAC. Yep, and that's at opensecrets.org. You can check that out. Yep, and so the wondering is, how does this sit with, him? Honestly, money aside, you're thinking about ethics and righteousness, right? Well, it just so happens that his grandfather has some very, very staunch opinions on Israel. So, Dr. Jeffries, and I located this archive. There is a particular portion of this that is really illuminating. But the title of this is Dr. Jeffries and the Anti-Semitic Branch of the Afrocentrism Movement. And this concept of anti-Semitism is also something that we can unpack very soon. But let's see here. Dr. Leonard Jeffries and the Anti-Semitic Branch of the Afrocentrism Movement. Yeah, particularly Jeffries is staunchly anti-Zionist. Now, we conflate Zionism with Semitism. I don't see how Semites are, Ilhan Omar is a Semite, right? But this idea that Hakeem Jeffries' grandfather was anti-Zionist, right? Categorized as anti-Semitic, which is faulty categorization. And particularly, there's some ideas that Dr. Jeffries had that I'd like to highlight here. Just a moment. Let me find this portion. Okay, so found it. Dr. Jeffries, the Jews and critics of his brand of Afrocentrism. Dr. Jeffries, along with many others, believes that education has for too long been Eurocentric, meaning that it's taught the history of the world as a European history and through European eyes, to the neglect of other experiences. This sounds a lot like critical race theory, particularly the propagation of non-European American history. So rather than trying to include other perspectives as part of a more complete educational framework, Dr. Jeffries preaches the supremacy of African history, just as he preaches the biological supremacy of people of color over. And the language in this article is problematic in so many ways. This is the reason why I scrolled through it and wanted some particular things from it. But again, that portion about pushing back against blanket Eurocentricity is, in a sense, related to Ron DeSantis's recent issues with critical race theory and the validity of so-called African American history in education. Yep. So as we consider that, I think maybe we should begin to talk about what Leonard Jeffries, the grandfather of Hakeem Jeffries, would say to his grandson with his blanket support for Israel and particularly for Zionism. So yes, that's our all access segment. And at this point, let's move to another section. In fact, just a moment, I'm going to load up here.